I've always believed in minding my own business. Live and let live, right? But apparently, some people have a real hard time with that concept, especially the newly formed HOA in our little rural community. Now, let's get something straight from the start. I never signed up for this HOA nonsense. Never agreed to their rules, their fees, or their self-important board members. My land has been in my family for 3 generations. I built my own cabin here, raised my kids here, and at 87 years old, I wasn't about to let some clipboard-wielding bureaucrats tell me how to live on my own damn property. But they tried anyway. It started with letters. Annoying, but harmless enough. Some garbage about new community standards and a mandatory membership fee. I tossed them in the wood stove and went about my day. Then came the fines. Bogus charges for things like failure to maintain landscaping and unauthorized structures. Again, I ignored them. I wasn't part of their little dictatorship, so their rules didn't apply to me. But then, things escalated. One afternoon, I was out back splitting firewood when I heard voices near my front gate. I walked around the cabin and saw a group of people standing there, looking over my property like they were appraising it. In the center of the pack stood a man in an expensive suit, out of place among the usual flannel and denim crowd around here. I recognized him from the HOA newsletters, the ones I used as fire starters. This was Charles Whitman, the new HOA president. His face lit up in a fake smile when he saw me. "Ah, Mr. Callahan. Glad we finally caught you." I leaned on my axe. Can't say I share the feeling. His smile didn't falter, but I saw the tightness in his jaw. "We've sent multiple notices regarding your outstanding fees and violations. Since you failed to respond, I wanted to personally inform you that the HOA will be moving forward with foreclosure proceedings." I laughed, out loud, right in his face. "Foreclosure? On my land. It's a standard legal process," he said smoothly. "If a property owner refuses to pay their HOA dues, the association has the right to place a lien on the property. If those fines aren't resolved, we can take further action to reclaim the land." I took a slow step toward him, letting the weight of my silence hang in the air. "Charles, do you see a single damn thing on this property that belongs to your HOA?" He hesitated, glancing at his clipboard. "This neighborhood falls under the jurisdiction of the Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association, established last year. I didn't sign up for it." "Well, the HOA was voted in by a majority of residents, and according to the new bylaws, all homes within the designated zone are subject to." "I never signed up for it," I repeated, taking another step forward. "And unless you've got my signature on a contract somewhere, your little rules don't mean squat to me." Now the fake smile was gone. "We were hoping to resolve this amicably, Mr. Callahan. But if you refuse to comply, we will pursue legal action." I crossed my arms. "Try it." Charles sighed dramatically, then motioned to his little entourage. "We'll be in touch." And just like that, they turned and walked back to their fancy SUVs, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a bad taste in my mouth. I should have known that was just the beginning. A few days later, I woke up to a hammering noise outside. I threw on my boots and stepped onto the porch to find a couple of hired goons nailing a foreclosure notice to my fence post. I snatched it down and skimmed through the nonsense. Apparently, I now owed $8,350 in HOA fees, fines, and legal costs. If I didn't pay up in 30 days, they'd move forward with seizing my land. I looked at the 2 men standing awkwardly by their truck. "Either of you boys got a pen?" One of them hesitated, then reached into his pocket and handed me one. I flipped the notice over and scribbled 2 words in big, bold letters. "Come try." Then I slapped it right back onto the fence post and walked inside. The next week was hell. First, the HOA sent a private security company to patrol the road near my property. They claimed it was for community safety, but I wasn't stupid. I knew they were just trying to intimidate me. Then, my mailbox mysteriously disappeared. Then, the water company called to inform me that an HOA representative had requested my service be shut off due to non-payment. Luckily, I had my own well, but the sheer audacity of these people was unreal. And then came the trespassers. I caught a couple of HOA board members walking right up to my cabin with measuring tapes, looking at my deck like they were trying to calculate property value. I didn't even bother with warnings that time. I grabbed my old paintball gun from the shed and let loose. 2 direct hits. 1 bright yellow splatter on a $400 suit. They ran. Fast. I watched them scramble back to their car, screaming something about the police. But when they came back with the sheriff, the old man just looked at them, then at me, then sighed. "Callahan," he muttered, shaking his head. "You paintballing people again? Only when they trespass." The HOA guy was furious. "This man assaulted us. You saw it. He admitted to it." The sheriff turned to me. "You got no trespassing signs up?" I gestured to the 5 signs nailed to my fence. He nodded. "Then they got no business being on your property. If you boys don't want to get shot with real paint next time, I suggest you stay off Mr. Callahan's land." The HOA goons stormed off, cursing and shouting threats about lawsuits. But I wasn't worried. I knew the law was on my side. Still, I also knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. And if they wanted a fight, I was damn sure going to give them one. The HOA's goons learned a valuable lesson that day. Trespassing on an old veteran's land wasn't a great idea. But I knew they weren't done. People like Charles Whitman don't just back down when they don't get their way. So, I did what any reasonable man would do when faced with a bunch of corrupt bureaucrats trying to steal his land. I called an old friend. Now, I don't like asking for help. Never have. But this was bigger than me. It was about principle. And if there was one person who knew how to take down scumbags like Charles, it was Mike Grayson, my old army buddy turned attorney. Mike picked up on the second ring. "Callahan, you old bastard. To what do I owe the pleasure? You still practicing law? Or did you finally retire and start fishing full-time?" He chuckled. "Still practicing. Though I should be charging extra just for answering your calls." "Good. I got an HOA problem." His amusement faded. "Damn. What did they do?" I gave him the rundown. The bogus fines, the fake foreclosure threats, the trespassing. He listened without interrupting, and by the time I finished, I could practically hear him shaking his head. "Classic overreach," he muttered. "Do you have anything in writing that says you joined this HOA?" "Nope." That's what I thought. These morons think they can strong-arm you into paying fees for something you never agreed to. Standard bully tactics. "So what's the move?" Mike sighed. "First thing, we're going to hit them with a cease and desist. That should scare them enough to back off. But if they don't, we'll file a lawsuit for harassment, illegal liens, and trespassing." That sounded good to me. "You need me to come into town?" "Nah, I'll handle the paperwork. Just sit tight and keep your paintball gun loaded." I grinned. You know me too well. A few days later, the cease and desist was officially served to Charles and his merry band of power-hungry idiots. I figured that would be the end of it. After all, most people don't like getting threatened with legal action. But Charles wasn't most people. 2 nights after Mike filed the papers, I was woken up by the sound of engines, multiple engines. I grabbed my rifle and stepped out onto the porch. What I saw made my blood boil. A construction crew was parked at my front gate, complete with bulldozers, floodlights, and men in hard hats. And standing there, looking smug as hell, was Charles Whitman himself. I set my rifle down against the porch railing and walked up to the gate. "You've got about 10 seconds to explain what the hell you think you're doing." Charles smiled, all fake politeness. "Good evening, Mr. Callahan. I'm afraid this is out of my hands now. The HOA has exercised its right to reclaim this property under our bylaws. These gentlemen are here to begin the process." I stared at him. "Reclaim?" He nodded. "You were given multiple opportunities to comply with HOA regulations. Your refusal to pay the necessary dues and fines has left us with no choice but to proceed with legal forfeiture. This land now belongs to the Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association." I took a slow, deep breath. "Charles, if your men so much as scratch my property, I swear on my mother's grave, you'll regret it." He chuckled, shaking his head. "That sounds like a threat, Mr. Callahan." I smiled. "It's a promise." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, Charles turned to the foreman and waved a dismissive hand. "Proceed." And that's when I snapped. Most people see an old man and assume he's harmless. They forget that old men like me used to be young men. Men who knew how to handle themselves in a fight. Before the construction crew could even fire up their equipment, I sprinted back into my cabin and grabbed my paintball gun. "Now, I know what you're thinking. Paintball? Really? Yes. Really. Because a well-aimed shot from a high-powered paintball gun hurts like hell. And I had an entire stockpile of ammo in bright neon colors. I kicked open my side door, aimed, and fired. Splat. A bright pink explosion of paint splattered across the windshield of the lead bulldozer. The driver yelped and hit the brakes. Splat. A second shot hit the foreman right in the chest. He screamed and stumbled backward, knocking over one of his men. Now, I wasn't aiming to really hurt anyone, but I was aiming to humiliate. And by the time I was done, every single one of those so-called workers was covered in a rainbow of paint. The construction crew panicked. One guy tripped over his own boots. Another threw down his clipboard and ran for his truck. The foreman was shouting something about getting the hell out of here, but I was too busy reloading to care. Then, I turned my sights on Charles. He stood frozen, staring at me with wide eyes. You wouldn't dare. I grinned. You sure about that? He took one step back, then another. Then he turned and bolted. I let him go. After all, I wasn't in the business of shooting cowards in the back. But the moment he reached his car, I took careful aim and fired one last shot. Splat. Bright yellow paint exploded all over the driver's side window. Charles screamed, jumped inside, and peeled out so fast he nearly hit his own guys. The entire construction crew followed, scrambling into their vehicles and speeding off like their lives depended on it. Within 5 minutes, my property was completely silent again. I stood there, watching the dust settle, and took a deep breath. Round one went to me, but I knew Charles wasn't done yet. And when he came back, I'd be ready. I spent the next morning cleaning up my porch, whistling to myself as I wiped neon-colored paint splatters off my boots. It had been a good night. Nothing like watching a bunch of corrupt HOA goons scatter like cockroaches after a little old-fashioned humiliation. But I knew the war wasn't over. Charles Whitman wasn't the type to let something like that go. He'd be back. And this time, I figured he'd come at me with lawyers instead of bulldozers. So, I beat him to the punch. I called up Mike again. Callahan, he answered, already chuckling. What the hell did you do this time? Nothing illegal, I said, stretching out on my rocking chair. But I might have made a few HOA board members rethink their life choices. Mike sighed. Go on. I gave him the play-by-play. Charles showing up in the middle of the night, the bogus foreclosure claims, and of course, the paintball massacre of 24. By the time I finished, Mike was outright laughing. I swear, Callahan, you're going to give some judge a stroke one day. As long as it's not my judge, I don't see the problem. Mike sobered up. All right. Listen, I've been digging through property records, and here's the deal. These idiots have no legal claim over your land. Not even a little bit. Yeah, I figured. No, you don't get it, Mike said. Most HOAs require signed agreements from property owners. But these clowns tried to establish a blanket jurisdiction over the entire neighborhood without individual consent. That's completely illegal. And the best part? I raised an eyebrow. There's a best part. Oh yeah, they already filed paperwork claiming foreclosure rights. But they messed up, big time. They listed your property in HOA records before the HOA legally existed. That means they're guilty of fraud. I let out a low whistle. Damn, that's bad. For them? Yeah, real bad. I grinned. So what's the move? We sue them. Hard. And not just for the bogus foreclosure. I could hear the excitement in Mike's voice now. We're talking harassment, trespassing, fraudulent liens, and malicious intent. If we play this right, Charles Whitman won't just lose his HOA position. He'll lose his damn house. I thought about it for a second. You think we can make it hurt? Mike chuckled darkly. Buddy, we're gonna make it burn. 2 days later, Charles and his goons got served. Mike made sure to deliver the lawsuit paperwork personally, just to see the look on their faces. He told me later that Charles actually choked on his coffee when he read the first page. The suit was airtight. Harassment? We had months of bogus fines and threats to prove it. Trespassing? I had security footage of those clipboard-wielding morons snooping around my land. Fraud. The HOA had filed public documents before they even existed. But the best part? Mike had also filed for a temporary restraining order against the HOA, which meant that until the case was settled, They couldn't come within 500 feet of my property. The sheriff himself delivered that little nugget of joy. I was sitting on my porch when Charles showed up, this time without his usual army of sycophants. His face was red as a tomato, and his fancy suit looked like he had just thrown it on in a hurry. "You think this is funny?" he snapped, waving the legal papers in my face. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Little bit." Charles fumed. "You're making a mistake, Callahan." "No, you made a mistake," I shot back, leaning forward. "You tried to scam an old man. Thought I'd be too weak or too stupid to fight back. You didn't count on me having friends. You didn't count on me knowing the law." His jaw clenched. "This lawsuit will get thrown out." "Oh, I doubt that," I said. "But even if it does, let's just say I've got some friends in the press who would love to hear about an HOA trying to steal land from a decorated veteran." I saw the exact moment the fear hit him. Charles liked his power. He liked controlling people. But what he didn't like was bad publicity. And if there was one thing small-town folks hated, it was corrupt HOAs trying to bully their neighbors. "This isn't over," he muttered. I smiled. "It really is, though." Charles must have realized how deep he was in, because the HOA caved fast. Within a week, their lawyers tried to settle. They offered to drop all fines, erase the fake foreclosure, and even pay me $20,000 in damages if I agreed to walk away. I told them to go to hell. I didn't want their money. I wanted revenge. Mike pushed forward with the lawsuit, and by the time the court date rolled around, things had gone from bad to worse for Charles. Turns out, my case had exposed some of the HOA's other dirty dealings. They'd been illegally charging residents fees that weren't in the original agreement. They'd been falsifying repair costs and pocketing the difference. And Charles? Oh, he'd been skimming HOA funds to pay off his own damn credit card debt. When that little detail came to light, the board turned on him immediately. By the end of the trial, the judge ruled in my favor on every single count. The HOA was forced to pay $50,000 in damages. Charles was personally fined for fraud, and the entire HOA leadership was removed. But the best part? Because of the fraud charges, Charles Whitman lost his own house. Apparently, he had been using HOA money to pay part of his mortgage, and when that got exposed, his lenders pulled the plug. I heard he had to sell his fancy SUV just to cover legal fees. I would have felt bad, but then I remembered the bulldozer stunt. So, instead of pity, I just enjoyed a nice, quiet evening on my porch, watching the sun set over the land that was still mine. And if Charles ever decided to come back and try something stupid, well, my paintball gun was still loaded. Winning the lawsuit felt good, real good. But the best part? Watching Charles Whitman's entire life crumble in real time. Word spread fast around town. Small communities like ours thrive on gossip, and Charles's downfall became the hottest topic at every diner, barbershop, and grocery store checkout line. By the time the local news picked up the story, it was game over for him. See, people around here hate two things more than anything. Firstly, someone trying to take what isn't theirs. Secondly, a fraudster pretending to be important. Charles was both, and the entire town turned against him. The Evergreen Hills HOA had been his personal playground, but after our lawsuit exposed his shady finances, his own board members kicked him out. They tried to salvage their reputation by pinning everything on him, but it was too little, too late. A month after the lawsuit wrapped up, the HOA officially dissolved. That's right, gone. No more bogus fines. No more clipboard warriors, no more power-tripping board members. The whole corrupt institution collapsed, and the remaining homeowners voted to abolish it permanently. And Charles? Oh, he got hit the hardest. With massive legal fees and fraud charges on his record, no one in town wanted to hire him. He lost his fancy HOA-funded house, leaving him scrambling for a place to live. His wife left him. Rumor had it she wasn't thrilled about his financial decisions. And best of all, the state launched an investigation into his handling of HOA funds. Last I heard, Charles was renting a cheap apartment 2 towns over, working a miserable job at a car rental place. From HOA president to pushing paper at a Hertz counter. Poetic justice. With the HOA dead and buried, the neighborhood finally went back to normal. No more security goons patrolling the streets. No more sneaky fines for unapproved garden gnomes or incorrectly parked mailboxes. No more clipboard Karens knocking on doors, demanding compliance. It was like the town took a deep breath and remembered how to mind its own damn business. A few of my neighbors even came by to thank me. Turns out, I wasn't the only one Charles had been trying to screw over. He'd been bleeding everyone dry with his fake fees. One guy, Jim, shook my hand and grinned. Hell, Callahan, you didn't just win your fight. You won ours too. I just shrugged. Some fights are worth having. But just because the HOA was gone didn't mean I was done cleaning house. See, while the lawsuit had taken care of the legal side of things, there was still one last piece of unfinished business. And I knew exactly how to handle it. A couple weeks after everything settled down, I took a little drive over to Charles's new place, a sad-looking apartment complex in a rundown part of town. I wasn't there to start trouble. Oh no, I just wanted to leave him with a parting gift. I pulled up across the street, grabbed my paintball gun, and took careful aim. Splat! Bright neon orange paint splattered across his apartment's front door. And, for good measure, splat! A second shot right on his mailbox. Then, I drove off, whistling to myself. I didn't wait around to see his reaction. Didn't need to. Because Charles knew. And he'd know exactly who sent the message. Stay gone. Or next time, it won't be paint. Thank you for listening to this story. Please share in the comments where you are from and if you enjoyed it, and see you next time.